51 ships, turned back, redirected, sent packing over the last few weeks. And not a single one of them owes that to a diplomat sitting at a table in Oman. That number owes itself to steel in the water and fighter jets in the sky. Start with the picture that just landed. An Air Force Stratotanker, a refueling aircraft that's been flying since the 1950s, passing gas to a Viper fighter jet over the Middle East, posted just hours ago. That single image explains more about this blockade than any diplomatic cable coming out of Muscat. Because that tanker bridge, that unglamorous gas station in the sky, is the entire reason American air power can sit over the Persian Gulf around the clock instead of showing up for 90 minutes and then limping home. Take away the tanker, and you take away the whole operation. It's worth sitting with that for a second. How often does the least glamorous piece of a machine turn out to be the piece holding everything else together? Feels true of more than just fighter jets. So let's walk through this in order, phase by phase, because there's a real sequence here, and the sequence tells you exactly who's actually calling the shots. Phase 1 is the blockade itself and the numbers behind it. Since the blockade snapped back into effect in the middle of July, United States Central Command has redirected 51 commercial vessels away from the Strait of Hormuz. 2 ships disabled, 2 more boarded. And the number that made it through Iranian interference completely unbothered: 0. Nothing. A whole lot of nothing. 51 ships pushed back into Iranian ports, harder and more consistently than at any point in this standoff. Ships, not diplomats, not paperwork. Ships turned around by American air power and naval presence sitting on that water day and night. Phase 2 is where it gets strange and where the contradiction shows up in broad daylight. For about a week straight, Iran's foreign ministry has been telling the world a deal was basically finished. Coordinates agreed with Oman. A joint statement in final drafting. A framework of understanding, they said, just waiting on approval from the top, from the supreme leader himself. Every one of those statements came out of the same building in Tehran, and every one of them pointed toward reopening the strait for global shipping. Then, in the last 24 hours, the people who actually hold the guns on that water spoke over the people who hold the letterhead. A spokesman for Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps went on record saying, in effect, that reopening the Strait of Hormuz is governed by the Guard's own mechanisms and conditions, and has nothing to do with whatever Iran's negotiators are working out with Oman. Read that again. The Guard just told its own foreign ministry, on the record, that the deal everyone's been waiting a week to hear about doesn't actually control the thing everyone assumed it controlled. Iran's diplomats can sign whatever Oman puts in front of them. The Guard already announced it isn't bound by it. That is basically what happened with the last nuclear agreement too, signed in Tehran, then quietly violated by the very forces meant to answer to that government. And this morning, while that contradiction was still fresh, a missile struck an Emirati tanker in that exact same waterway. Emirati officials aren't being diplomatic about it anymore. They're using the word piracy now, flat out, calling the Revolutionary Guard pirates. Sometimes calling a thing what it is turns out to be the simplest and most accurate move available. 15 Emirati tankers attacked since February. Iran calls it a sovereignty issue, then puts a missile into a neighbor's ship and calls that sovereignty too. Makes you wonder what sovereignty even means when it's being enforced with anti-ship missiles instead of laws. Phase 3, and this is the part that deserves real attention. What's actually flying overhead while all this plays out? The backbone of it is that Stratotanker, an airframe that first flew in 1956. It was built for one job: keep nuclear bombers airborne long enough to reach the Soviet Union and make it home again. Designed around a war that never happened. 70 years later, that same design is the load-bearing wall underneath this entire naval blockade. There's something almost poetic about it. A plane built to enable a strike nobody ever launched is now the thing that lets American air power stay on station whenever it wants, doing surveillance, doing reconnaissance, just watching and waiting. Above the tanker, the picture builds in layers, roughly 3 of them. The first layer is the eyes, the F-35 Lightning stealth fighter carrying a powerful electronically scanned radar and an infrared sensor system that gives it full 360-degree awareness. Flying over that water, it's basically a flying radar station, picking up every small craft, every wake, everything leaving an Iranian port, and feeding that picture to everyone else in the fight. Central Command released footage back in mid-July of F-35s taking on fuel over the Middle East, and just hours ago, another F-35 image surfaced supporting this blockade directly. The second layer is the muscle, the F-16 Viper, the jet Central Command keeps putting on the refueling boom and keeping airborne around the clock. And here's the detail worth knowing. These Vipers are carrying laser-guided rocket systems, precision weapons that can lock onto a drone, and once the laser's on target, artificial intelligence takes over the tracking so the pilot doesn't have to hold the laser the entire time. That matters more than it sounds like, because a fighter pilot in that airspace is doing a dozen things at once, flying a jet at several hundred miles an hour over hostile water while also scanning for threats. Anything that frees up a pilot's attention is worth its weight in gold. And because Iran doesn't send one drone at a time, they send a dozen, a swarm, because that's a piracy tactic that works better in numbers. A jet that can service a dozen targets in a couple of passes is worth an enormous amount over that water. The economics are almost funny. A rocket costing a few tens of thousands of dollars, taking down a drone that costs even more to build. Every intercept is basically Iran losing money on the exchange. But none of that works without persistence, and persistence is the whole fight. Without the tanker bridge, a Viper flying out of a forward airfield could stay over the strait for roughly 90 minutes before needing fuel, and less than that if it ever had to use its afterburner in a fight. 90 minutes isn't a presence, it's a visit. You need aircraft airborne continuously, feeding data to shipboard defense systems, keeping every asset in that theater on the same picture. Any gap in coverage and the whole operation stumbles. One of these tankers was lost over Afghanistan years back, and the airmen aboard never made it home. A hard reminder of just how much is asked of the crews holding this bridge together, day after day, mission after mission. Now for what's coming, the piece not yet confirmed in this theater, but potentially the most consequential of all. An autonomous fighter aircraft being developed by the company Shield AI called XAE or XPAT. It takes off vertically, meaning no runway, no fixed base for an adversary to target and destroy. It runs its own mission logic on board through proprietary software, uses a similar engine to the Viper, has a range over 2,000 nautical miles, and can operate without GPS or communications links. The company's own estimate is that 10 to 20 of these aircraft would cost roughly what a single next-generation stealth bomber costs. If that holds up, getting this platform combat-ready ought to be a real priority. Teamed with manned fighters and this naval blockade, it's the kind of advantage that's genuinely hard for any other military on Earth to match. And even if this exact blockade eventually winds down, the underlying question doesn't go away. Watching, verifying, staying skeptical of promises versus actions, especially with a nuclear program still sitting in the background of every conversation with Tehran. Phase 4 is the wider picture, because this same week has news breaking on two other fronts worth knowing about. In Ukraine, in the early morning hours, a warehouse manager in the city of Yekaterinburg watched 3 drones come down through the roof of a logistics building the size of 30 football fields, roughly 2,000 kilometers from the nearest Ukrainian soldier. Ukrainian long-range drones struck a Wildberries logistics center deep inside Russia, far past the front line. Regional officials reported 8 drones downed over the area, 3 of which got through and hit the building, and Russian aviation authorities shut down a nearby airport as a precaution. This wasn't an isolated hit. Ukraine has now struck roughly 20 facilities belonging to that retailer since late July. An independent Russian outlet counting 8 of the company's 15 largest logistics centers now out of operation. The retailer moves dual-use goods, including components that feed into Russian drone production. Kyiv essentially stopped bombing the weapons factory and started bombing the store the factory shops at. A Ukrainian drone brigade commander says Russian units are now rationing cameras, propellers, controllers, batteries. the exact small parts needed to build or upgrade a drone. Both the company and the Russian government deny any military connection, which is a strange thing to insist on when 8 of your 15 biggest warehouses are suddenly empty craters. And near Taiwan, tanks rolled onto the tarmac at Taoyuan International Airport. Abrams tanks from the Army's 584th Armored Brigade, alongside armored vehicles taking up firing positions right beside commercial aircraft, while engineers assembled anti-landing obstacles between the runways. First time Taiwan's newest tanks have ever deployed to that airport. The scenario being rehearsed is lifted almost exactly from what happened outside Kyiv years back, when Russian forces tried to seize an airport and turn it into a supply corridor for the whole invasion. Taipei isn't rehearsing a beach landing this week. It's rehearsing the opening minutes of an airport seizure, because that's reportedly how a move against Taiwan could actually begin. So where does that leave the Strait of Hormuz? For months, people have talked about it like a diplomatic problem, waiting on a diplomatic fix. What's actually visible now is that the strait is under the control of the Revolutionary Guard Corps, full stop. They've said outright that even if Oman and Tehran sign something, the Guard still controls that water and still collects its toll. That tells you negotiating with the government in Tehran has painfully limited odds of producing anything the Guard will actually honor. So here's the honest, open question, the one without a clean answer. If the men holding the missiles on that water don't answer to the men holding the pen at the negotiating table, is there really a deal to be made at all? Or is the American tanker bridge and that fighter presence simply going to be the only thing keeping that strait open for however long this drags on? Where do you think this actually goes from here?